Welcome back to the Humble Market Timer YouTube channel. Once again, if you enjoy the content, please like, comment, and subscribe. In today's video, I want to look at the pullback in silver. We're going to analyze what areas it's likely to hit if we are in a consolidation or a pullback phase in silver. It's made a massive move. When you make massive moves, you're going to get pullbacks. So I want to kind of pinpoint some areas where I think people who are interested in maybe wanting to get back in silver, who may have missed the run, can look for prices to hit as we progress into 2026. Before I go any further, please check the description for my disclaimer. Once again, these are my sole ideas, not investment advice. Now, we had this big massive run in silver. We made a push all the way to about $84. We've since had a pullback. As you can see, we pulled back about 15 to 20% to this midpoint line that we have here on the daily chart of silver. So I think that's a pretty obvious place for the first pullback area to be. We will be able to see moving forward in 2026 if we will be able to stay above this midpoint line in the parallel that I have drawn here. If we stay above that midpoint line, you can see us, great possibility we'll continue to push higher. If we break this line, there's some key areas that I think we should look for where the pullback could occur even further, but only if we do break this midpoint line. I want to quickly go back to the gold and silver ratio chart, which I thought it did a great job in picking the top for silver, at least in the short term. And I want to look at how we've had this recent action over the last, say, 8 months. And I want to draw a line here to kind of show you the declining line, and how we hit this area about in late November, and look at the acceleration lower that we had off the decline. You cannot be surprised if we sort of have a move and we kind of work our way back up to that line before we move lower. This will represent potentially an increase in increase in gold and a decrease in the price of silver, or just a decrease in both. And because silver has moved so much more aggressively than gold, the depreciation of the price of silver will be probably and more than likely more violent than any depreciation that we see in the price of gold. So that would warrant a move back up to the trend line that we had been in since about April of 2025. It was a pretty distinct decline, but if you notice the acceleration of the decline once we hit the end of November and sort of after Thanksgiving. So based on the gold and silver ratio, you could predict potentially a bounce all the way back up to this line, which would maybe be in about that 75 to 73 area, depending on where we hit that line. But when you get this big of a drop, you can expect somewhat of a bounce here. So keep that in mind as a potential when you're looking at potential moves lower in the price of silver before we get any potential moves back up. Going back to the silver chart, you can see here we have, as I mentioned, we're currently staying above this midpoint line. But I want to point out a couple things. Let's do a bit of a Fibonacci retracement so we can kind of see where we could go just from a Fibonacci retracement point of view. As you can see here, the initial pullback that we have to the midpoint line is, lo and behold, right at the 0.382. Typically when you have these pullbacks, you go either to the 0.5, the 0.618, or the 0.786. I think it's pretty ironic that the 786, which is a very common pullback level, corresponds to where we initially had topped in silver before we made our very first pullback off the most recent top that we had in silver. So I think that's pretty ironic, and I think it kind of shows you the power of the charts and how it corresponds with the Fibonacci retracement. You can see the 0.5 is 6.5, so if we break this line, I think you could see us going to at least the 0.5, which would be $65. The next level would be 60, which would be the 618. Depending on where that lands, that could correspond with the bottom trend line of this parallel that we're currently in. And then if things fall even further, we'll work our way down to that 54 area. So keep that in mind when looking at the Fibonacci retracement. Also, when I look at daily charts of stocks or commodities, I look at the candles, and oftentimes when you see green candles in daily charts, they tend to get backfilled at some point. So you almost have to look at a green candle from a daily chart standpoint almost as if it's a gap. So generally you have gaps. Your gaps generally get filled. So if you have a space here, like say for example here and here and here and here, if you notice there has been no back test of this particular move right here with these two candles. So oftentimes you can anticipate that when you do have a pullback, that pullback level will be to back test these two candles, which sort of act as a gap. So in that particular area, I think your first area you could look for, if we do break below this midpoint line, would be in that $67-ish range. So keep an eye on that. If you look and use that same logic, you see here in this area right here, this part of this candle has not been backfilled. So you could draw potentially a line here to about here, and you could see that this area could get filled. It's in that about 59 area. Also, one more area, you see we broke out here when it hit the 54 area, but you see this area to retest this breakout point did not get filled. So you're looking at also another potential backfill here, which would be all the way back down in that 54 area, much like we saw in the Fibonacci retracement. So I think these are the areas you should look for if you see a pullback in silver. I think potentially you could pull all the way back to the bottom of this parallel. I think that would actually be the most likely scenario. However, if things are bullish and things remain bullish and the price action remains strong, it remains strong in areas like China, which is still has silver at about $75, and it's going to be off for the holidays. So there's going to be no price action for the next, I believe, 4 or 5 days in China. So at that point, the U.S. will kind of rule the nest, and so that will give potential downward action in the price of silver, because we don't have China kind of holding up and pushing up the price of silver. If you keep in mind that margin rates are being hiked in both China and at the COMEX, when you have those margin hikes, that puts downward pressure on the price action. So there are lots of things that the market can do to bring price down, and right now silver is in that type of action where they're trying to kind of suppress the price and bring it down after it made such a historic move. If you look down here at the RSI, you see the RSI has sort of hit a level of support after this 15-20% pullback. If we break this line, the RSI, you could possibly see a lot further downside, and that downside could correspond to it hitting these zones here on the silver chart. So keep an eye on all these levels, the RSI, the Fibonacci retracement, the backfills of these candles. All these things should be in your radar for when we look for the pullback in silver. I really don't think the silver run is over, but it is definitely due for a breather. So if we get one, I would look at it as an opportunity to maybe add or start a position. I wouldn't look at it as if the run is completely over. Hope you like the content. If you like it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.